Hey guys, tonight we begin with brilliant Victorian women locked in asylums for reading too much, having opinions, or refusing bad sex. While you might imagine insane asylums held genuinely mentally ill people, the reality was intelligent women drugged, restrained, and tortured for being inconveniently smart. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself as a woman in London, 1858. You are 28 years old, intelligent, well-read. You've been married for 3 years to a man who increasingly resents your intelligence. You read books, philosophy, science, political theory. You have opinions about the world. You express those opinions, even when your husband tells you to be quiet. You are not docile enough, not submissive enough, not properly feminine according to Victorian ideals. One morning, 2 men arrive at your house. Your husband has signed papers declaring you insane. The men are asylum attendants. They're here to take you away. You protest. You are not insane. This is a mistake. You have the right to refuse. But you don't have rights. You are a married woman. Your husband legally controls you. He has declared you insane. A doctor he hired has signed the commitment papers without even meeting you. And now these men are going to take you to an asylum. Whether you agree or not. You fight, you scream, you try to run. The attendants grab you, rough hands on your arms, your body. They're stronger than you. You are dragged from your home. Neighbours see but don't intervene. This is legal. A husband has the right to commit his wife. And who are they to judge whether you are really insane? Maybe you are. Women who are too clever, too opinionated, too difficult. Maybe that is a form of madness. You are taken to a private asylum, one of the many institutions that have proliferated in Victorian England, supposedly to treat mental illness, but actually serving as convenient dumping grounds for inconvenient women. The asylum is a large Victorian building, imposing and prison-like. You are brought through the entrance, still protesting, still insisting you are not insane. The intake process strips away your identity. Your clothes are removed. The attendants don't care about your modesty or your protests. You are forced into a coarse asylum uniform. Your personal belongings are taken away. Your wedding ring, any jewellery, books if you had any with you, all confiscated. You have nothing now except the institutional uniform and the label that has been placed on you. Insane. You are examined by the asylum doctor. He doesn't really listen to you. You try to explain that you are not insane, that your husband committed you because you have independent thoughts, because you are not submissive enough. The doctor writes in his notes, patient displays agitation and refuses to accept her condition, shows signs of moral insanity and excessive intellectual activity unsuited to her sex, believes herself to be rational despite clear evidence of mental disturbance. Everything you say is interpreted as proof of insanity. If you are calm and try to reason with them, you are displaying cunning typical of the insane. If you are agitated and upset, who wouldn't be being kidnapped and imprisoned? You are displaying mania or hysteria. If you cry, you are emotionally unstable. If you don't cry, you are unnaturally cold. There is no right way to behave that will convince them you are sane. The diagnosis has already been made. You are here, therefore you are insane. Everything you do will be interpreted through that lens. You are taken to a ward, a long room with beds lining the walls. Other women are here, some genuinely suffering from mental illness. Others like you, sane women committed for being inconvenient. The ward smells of unwashed bodies, urine, and the chemical smell of whatever drugs they're using to sedate patients. The noise is constant women crying, screaming, talking to themselves or to hallucinations. The cacophony is maddening. You are expected to sleep here, to live here, surrounded by this chaos. According to research by historian Dr. Andrew Scull at UC San Diego on Victorian asylums, commitment to a mental institution required minimal evidence. 2 signatures, typically a family member and a doctor, were sufficient to have someone committed indefinitely. For married women, the husband's signature alone could be enough, especially if he hired a compliant doctor willing to diagnose insanity without thorough examination. The system was ripe for abuse, and abuse was rampant. Thousands of sane women were committed to asylums, not because they were mentally ill, but because they were inconvenient, difficult, or possessed property someone wanted. Let's examine what constituted insanity in Victorian women. You are considered insane if you read too much. Excessive reading, especially of serious intellectual content, is considered dangerous for women. The Victorian medical establishment believes that intellectual activity diverts blood from the reproductive organs to the brain, causing the uterus to atrophy and leading to various forms of madness. Reading philosophy, science, political theory, these are male intellectual pursuits. Women who engage in them are overstepping their natural boundaries and damaging their delicate female brains. You are considered insane if you have strong political opinions. Women should be focused on domestic concerns, home, children, supporting their husbands. If you express opinions about politics, about social issues, about anything beyond your immediate domestic sphere, you are displaying inappropriate masculine behavior. This mannishness is seen as a form of mental disturbance. Women who attend political meetings, who join reform movements, who publicly express opinions, all can be labelled insane. You are considered insane if you refuse sexual intercourse with your husband. Victorian marriage law gives husbands unlimited sexual access to their wives. Wives cannot legally refuse. If you consistently refuse your husband's sexual advances, you are displaying moral insanity, a term used for people whose behavior is immoral or socially inappropriate, even if they don't have obvious delusions or hallucinations. Your refusal to fulfill your wifely duties is evidence of mental defect. You are considered insane if you masturbate. Female masturbation is seen as both a cause and symptom of insanity. If discovered or suspected, it can be grounds for commitment. Doctors believe female masturbation causes hysteria, nymphomania, and eventually complete mental breakdown. Young women discovered masturbating have been committed to asylums where they're subjected to treatments designed to prevent the behavior. You are considered insane if you are too sexual or not sexual enough. Nymphomania, excessive sexual desire, is a recognized form of female insanity, but so is frigidity, insufficient sexual desire. The acceptable range is incredibly narrow. Any deviation from the Victorian ideal of modest female sexuality that responds to her husband's needs, but never initiates or shows too much enthusiasm, can be labelled as mental illness. You are considered insane if you are angry or rebellious. Women should be gentle, submissive, accepting of their lot. If you express anger at your circumstances, if you rebel against restrictions, if you refuse to be docile, these are signs of moral insanity or mania. Your justified anger at being treated as property is reinterpreted as irrational female hysteria. You are considered insane if you spend money without your husband's permission. You have no legal right to money, even if you brought wealth to the marriage. If you spend money on yourself, on books, on clothes, on anything, without male permission, this can be evidence of the poor judgment characteristic of insanity. Your assertion of financial independence is proof that you lack the mental capacity to manage money. You are considered insane if you try to leave your husband. Attempting to separate or divorce, or even just expressing the desire to do so, can be taken as evidence of mental disturbance. A sane woman would accept her marriage vows as sacred and permanent. Only an insane woman would want to leave a marriage, even an abusive one, according to research by Dr. Elaine Showalter at Princeton University on Victorian women and madness. The diagnosis of insanity in women was deeply tied to social control. Women who violated gender norms, who were too intellectual, too independent, too sexual, not sexual enough, too angry, not submissive enough, could be labelled insane and removed from society. The asylum system functioned as a mechanism for enforcing conformity to narrow Victorian ideals of femininity. Intelligence in women, particularly when combined with any form of resistance to male authority, was frequently pathologized as mental illness. Let's examine a specific real case. Louisa Nottage, committed to an asylum by her brothers in 1846. Louisa was 46 years old, single, and had inherited substantial wealth from her father. She became interested in a religious community led by a man named Henry Prince. Her family disapproved. They thought Prince was a charlatan, and that Louisa's involvement with his community was evidence of insanity. Louisa's brothers conspired to have her committed. They hired Dr. Forbes Winslow, a prominent alienist, the Victorian term for psychiatrists, specializing in insanity. Winslow examined Louisa briefly and diagnosed her with religious mania. Supposedly, she had become mentally unbalanced due to excessive religious enthusiasm. The real issue was that Louisa was using her inherited wealth to support Prince's community, and her brothers wanted control of her money. Louisa was taken by force to Moorcroft House, a private asylum in Surrey. She protested that she was sane, that her commitment was a conspiracy to control her money. Her protests were noted in her medical file as further evidence of her insanity. Patient believes she is being persecuted by her family for financial motives. Displays typical paranoid delusions of the insane. At Moorcroft House, Louisa was subjected to the standard asylum treatments. She was kept in isolation for periods, supposedly to calm her mania. She was given drugs, opiates to sedate her, purgatives to cleanse her system. She was denied visitors who might support her or help her escape. She was told repeatedly that she was insane, that she needed to accept her condition and submit to treatment. Louisa remained in the asylum for nearly 4 years. She never stopped insisting she was sane. Finally, in 1850, her case came to public attention through legal proceedings. Louisa had managed to smuggle out letters describing her situation. Reformers took up her case. Eventually, she was released after a legal battle that revealed the flimsy medical evidence for her commitment and the obvious financial motives of her brothers. After her release, Louisa sued those responsible for her false commitment. The trial revealed shocking details about how easily sane women could be committed and how difficult it was to get released. Dr. Winslow was exposed as having diagnosed her after only a brief interview, relying mainly on her brother's descriptions rather than his own observations. The jury found in Louisa's favour, awarding her damages. But 4 years of her life had been stolen. She had been drugged, imprisoned, told she was insane, subjected to treatments that damaged her health. According to research by historian Dr. Sarah Wise on Victorian women's confinement, Louisa Nottage's case was one of several high-profile cases in the 1850s that exposed asylum abuse. Her case contributed to the Lunacy Act of 1853, which added some protections against wrongful commitment. But the protections were limited and abuse continued for decades. Louisa's case shows how a woman's intelligence, independent thinking, and control of her own money made her a target for commitment by male relatives who wanted to control her. Let's examine another real case, Georgina Weldon, a woman who fought back against attempted commitment and became a prominent campaigner for asylum reform. Georgina was born in 1837, married Harry Weldon in 1860. The marriage was unhappy. Georgina was intelligent, talented musically, and interested in spiritualism. She held seances at her home and corresponded with various spiritualists and reformers. Her husband found her increasingly embarrassing. In 1878, Harry Weldon decided to have Georgina committed. He consulted with Dr. Littleton's Stuart Forbes Winslow, son of the Dr. Winslow who had committed Louisa Nottage decades earlier. Asylum commitment was a family business. Winslow agreed to certify Georgina as insane based on Harry's descriptions of her behaviour without examining Georgina. Harry arranged for asylum attendants to come to the house and take Georgina away, but Georgina got wind of the plan. A servant warned her that men were coming to take her to an asylum. Georgina fled her home, escaping just before the attendants arrived. She went into hiding, staying with friends and supporters. From hiding, she launched a legal and public relations campaign against her husband and Dr. Winslow. Georgina couldn't return home. If she did, she'd be immediately seized and committed, but she couldn't just disappear. She had no independent income and needed to fight for her rights. So she became a public figure, speaking at meetings, writing articles, giving interviews. She described how her husband had tried to have her committed, simply for being inconvenient, for having interests he didn't approve of, for not being submissive enough. Georgina sued Dr. Winslow for conspiring to falsely imprison her. The trial became a sensation. Georgina represented herself, cross-examining witnesses, making impassioned speeches to the jury. She won her case. The jury found that Winslow had agreed to certify her insane without proper examination, purely on her husband's say. So she was awarded damages. But Georgina didn't stop there. She spent the next decades campaigning for reform of lunacy laws. She highlighted how easily women could be committed by husbands or relatives. She described the horrors of asylums based on testimony from women who had been confined. She pushed for legal protections, for requiring more rigorous evidence before commitment, for giving committed people the right to legal representation. Georgina's activism was exhausting and consumed her life. She became known as a bit of an eccentric, which her opponents used to suggest she might actually be insane after all. But she never was committed. She died in 1914, having spent over 30 years fighting asylum abuse. Her work contributed to gradual reforms that made wrongful commitment somewhat more difficult, though the system remained deeply flawed into the 20th century. According to research by Dr. Margaret Stacey on Georgina Weldon's life, her case demonstrates both the vulnerability of Victorian women and the possibility of resistance. Georgina escaped commitment only because she was warned in time and had the intelligence and courage to fight back legally and publicly. Many women weren't so fortunate. They were taken by surprise, committed before they could resist, and then trapped in a system designed to keep them confined. Georgina's voice brought attention to their plight, but she couldn't save them all. Let's examine the specific conditions inside Victorian asylums. What daily life was like for women committed there. You are in an asylum, in a ward with 30 other women. You wake at dawn to the sound of attendants walking through the ward, rousing patients. You are expected to rise immediately, no matter how poorly you slept in the uncomfortable bed, surrounded by noise and chaos. You are taken to a washroom, a large cold room with basins of water. The water is cold and not particularly clean. The same water is used by multiple patients. You are given minimal privacy. Attendants watch to make sure you wash. If you are considered dangerous or difficult, attendants might wash you themselves, handling your body roughly, with no regard for your dignity. You are dressed in the asylum uniform, coarse, shapeless institutional clothing that marks you as insane. The clothes are worn by multiple patients, washed infrequently, never fitting properly. You have no personal clothes, no way to express individuality. Everyone looks the same, dressed in the same institutional uniform, all marked as inmates rather than people. Breakfast is institutional food porridge, bread, weak tea. The food is bland, minimal, designed to meet basic nutritional needs at lowest cost. You eat in a dining hall, supervised by attendants. Conversation is discouraged. You are expected to eat quickly and quietly. If you refuse to eat either because the food is revolting or because you are protesting your confinement, attendants will force feed you, holding your nose and pouring liquid food down your throat while you gag. After breakfast, you are taken to a day room. This is a large room where patients spend most of the day. There is minimal furniture, hard benches around the walls. There is nothing to do. No books. Reading might excite your brain. No meaningful work. No entertainment. You sit for hours, day after day, staring at walls, at other patients, at nothing. The boredom is crushing, mind-numbing, almost physically painful in its intensity. Some women talk to themselves or to hallucinations. Some rock back and forth continuously. Some sit in catatonic silence. Some scream. The noise and chaos are constant. You are surrounded by suffering, by genuine mental illness, and by other sane women like you who are slowly breaking under the strain of imprisonment and isolation. Attendants watch constantly. They're not medical professionals. They're working-class people with no training, hired to watch patients and prevent escapes. Some are kind. Many are cruel. They have complete power over you. If you displease an attendant, they can punish you, lock you in isolation, restrain you, withhold food, report you to doctors as being difficult, which results in harsher treatment. If you protest your confinement, if you insist you are sane and demand to be released, this is taken as further evidence of insanity. Sane people accept authority. Insane people resist and believe they're being persecuted. Your rational arguments for your sanity are reinterpreted as irrational delusions. The more articulately you defend yourself, the more proof you provide of your cunning. The dangerous intelligence of the insane who can mimic rationality while being fundamentally mad. According to research by psychiatrist Dr. Nancy Tomes on asylum life, Victorian asylums were characterized by extreme boredom, lack of meaningful activity, and complete loss of autonomy. Patients had no control over any aspect of their lives. When they woke, ate, bathed, slept, where they went, what they did. This total institutionalization was psychologically devastating. Sane people committed to asylums sometimes did become genuinely mentally ill from the trauma of confinement, fulfilling the prophecy of their diagnosis. Let's examine the treatments used on women in Victorian asylums, procedures that were supposed to cure insanity, but were actually torture. You are diagnosed with mania. You've been agitated. Who wouldn't be imprisoned against your will? You've been insisting you are sane. You've been difficult with attendants. The doctor prescribes treatment. First, restraint. You are put in a straitjacket, a canvas garment with long sleeves that wrap around your body and tie in back, immobilizing your arms. You can't move. You can't scratch an itch. You can't adjust your position. If you are uncomfortable, you can only sit or lie in whatever position attendants place you, trapped in the jacket for hours or even days. Or you are restrained in a chair, strapped down with leather restraints around your wrists, ankles, waist, even your head if you move too much. You sit in this chair unable to move, sometimes for days. You develop sores from the restraints cutting into your skin. You urinate and defecate in the chair because you can't get to a toilet. You sit in your own waste until attendants remember to clean you, which might not be for hours. Or you are put in a crib, an adult-sized cage with a lid that locks. You are locked inside this crib, lying on your back, unable to sit up or turn over. The crib is hot, claustrophobic, dark when the lid is closed. You can't escape. You can't move. You are trapped like an animal in a cage, which is exactly how you are being treated. Like a dangerous animal that needs to be contained. Second, hydrotherapy. This sounds pleasant, but isn't. You are submerged in a bath of ice-cold water for extended periods. The shock is supposed to calm mania. In reality, it is torture. Your body temperature drops dangerously. You shake uncontrollably. you risk hypothermia, or you are subjected to high-pressure water jets, water sprayed forcefully at your body, painful and disorienting, or you are wrapped in cold wet sheets and left to lie for hours, the wet fabric clinging to you, making you shiver and miserable. Third, drugs, opiates to sedate you, laudanum, morphine. You are given doses that leave you in a fog, unable to think clearly, barely aware of your surroundings. The drugs are addictive. Women kept on opiates for months or years become physically dependent. If you complain about the drugs, you are given more clearly. You need more sedation. If you are still capable of complaint, or you are given purgatives, powerful laxatives that cause violent diarrhea. The theory is that mental illness can be expelled from the body along with the bowel contents. You suffer cramps, dehydration, the humiliation of losing control of your bowels repeatedly. The purgatives don't cure anything, but they make you weaker and more compliant, which is the real goal. Fourth, gynecological interventions. Victorian medicine believes many forms of female insanity originate in the reproductive organs. If you are diagnosed with hysteria or nymphomania or other specifically female forms of madness, doctors might perform gynecological procedures without your consent. Removal of the ovaries, removal of the clitoris, cauterization of the genitals, procedures designed to eliminate excessive sexual feeling or to prevent masturbation. These procedures are done without anesthesia or with minimal anesthesia. The pain is excruciating. The recovery is agonizing. Many women develop infections from the non-sterile surgical conditions. Some die from complications. Those who survive are left with permanent damage, inability to have children, chronic pain, sexual dysfunction, all in the name of curing their supposed mental illness. According to research by Dr. Elaine Showalter on Victorian psychiatric treatment, the cruelty of asylum treatments was justified by the belief that insane people needed their animal natures subdued. Restraint, shock treatments, sedation, and surgical intervention were all seen as legitimate medical procedures. The fact that they caused suffering was considered necessary. The mad had to be broken and remade into docile, controllable individuals. Women especially needed to be returned to proper feminine submission. If the treatment seemed harsh, that was because female insanity required harsh correction. Let's examine another real case. Elizabeth Packard, an American woman whose case parallels many British experiences. Elizabeth was born in 1816, married Theophilus Packard, a minister, in 1839. They had 6 children. Elizabeth was intelligent, well-read, and increasingly found herself disagreeing with her husband on religious matters. She expressed her views in Bible study groups. Theophilus found her theological independence embarrassing and threatening. In 1860, Theophilus had Elizabeth committed to Illinois State Hospital for the insane. Under Illinois law at the time, a husband could have his wife committed to an asylum without any independent medical examination. His word alone was sufficient. Elizabeth was taken from her home and children and locked in the asylum. She was 44 years old and perfectly sane. At the asylum, Elizabeth immediately protested her commitment. She wrote letters. She demanded to speak with asylum officials. She insisted on her sanity. Everything she did was noted in her file as evidence of insanity. The asylum superintendent, Dr. Andrew McFarland, took a personal interest in her case. He believed she was sane, but also believed that wives should submit to their husbands. He tried to persuade Elizabeth to promise to be more obedient to Theophilus. She refused. Her refusal to submit was considered evidence of moral defect, if not technical insanity. Elizabeth was kept at the asylum for 3 years. During that time, she witnessed the treatment of other patients. Woman restrained, drugged, subjected to brutal procedures. She carefully documented everything she saw, writing in secret journals that she hid from attendants. She was preparing to fight back, to expose what was happening in the asylum if she ever got out. In 1863, Theophilus arranged Elizabeth's release, not because she was cured, but because the asylum needed her bed for paying patients. Elizabeth's commitment had been at public expense. Theophilus took Elizabeth home, but immediately locked her in a room in their house, intending to keep her permanently confined there. Neighbours noticed that Elizabeth was being kept prisoner. Some sympathetic neighbours helped her smuggle out a note. Friends contacted a lawyer. Elizabeth was brought before a jury in a sanity trial. The trial was highly unusual. Typically, commitment happened without any trial, and once committed, getting out required convincing asylum doctors, not a jury. At her trial, Elizabeth represented herself. She spoke for hours, describing her theological views, explaining why she disagreed with her husband, demonstrating her intelligence and rationality. She made the case that disagreement is not insanity, that wives are entitled to their own opinions. The jury deliberated for 7 minutes before finding her sane. She was freed. Elizabeth spent the rest of her life campaigning for the rights of asylum inmates and married women. She wrote books exposing asylum abuses. She pushed for legal reforms. She travelled extensively, speaking to audiences about her experiences. Her activism contributed to reforms in commitment laws in several states, making it somewhat harder for husbands to unilaterally commit their wives. Elizabeth died in 1897, having spent over 30 years as an activist. Her case exposed how commitment laws were used to control inconvenient women, how asylums functioned as prisons for the sane as well as the insane, and how women's intelligence and independence were pathologized as mental illness. According to research by historian Dr. Barbara Sappensley on Elizabeth Packard's life, her case was important but not unique. Thousands of women were committed by husbands, fathers, brothers for similar reasons, for being too independent, too opinionated, too difficult. Most never got Elizabeth's chance at a jury trial. Most remained confined, some for years or decades, some until death. Elizabeth was fortunate to escape and strong enough to fight back. Many women weren't. Let's examine the economic motivations behind asylum commitments. You are a widow, 55 years old, in possession of substantial property inherited from your late husband. You have 2 adult sons. You intend to leave your property to charity rather than to your sons. Your sons are unhappy with this. They can't legally force you to change your will. You are a widow, not a wife, so you have some legal autonomy, but they can have you declared insane. Your sons consult with a doctor. They describe you as eccentric. You collect cats. You are interested in spiritualism. You have strong opinions. These are not symptoms of insanity in themselves, but they can be spun that way. The doctor examines you briefly, notes that you are elderly and female, both considered risk factors for insanity, notes your eccentricities, and signs a certificate of lunacy. You are committed to an asylum. Once you are declared insane, your sons become your legal guardians. They control your property. They can sell it, spend it, do whatever they want with it. You are locked in an asylum, and your wealth is being stolen legally. If you protest, if you try to contact lawyers or authorities, your protests are interpreted as paranoid delusions. The system is rigged against you. This scenario played out repeatedly in Victorian England. Elderly widows with property were particularly vulnerable. So were single women who inherited wealth, family members who stood to inherit, or who wouldn't inherit if the woman disposed of her property differently, had financial motives to have women committed, and the system made it easy. Private asylums had economic incentives to accept patients. They were paid by families for housing and treating patients. The more patients, the more income. Asylum operators had no incentive to release patients or to question the legitimacy of commitments. A patient who paid fees and didn't cause trouble was ideal from a business perspective. Doctors who certified people as insane sometimes had financial arrangements with asylums, referral fees, kickbacks. A doctor who regularly sent patients to a particular asylum might receive compensation. This created conflicts of interest. Doctors had financial incentive to certify people as insane, especially people whose families were willing to pay for long-term asylum care. According to research by historian Dr. Joan Busfield at University of Essex on economic aspects of Victorian psychiatry, asylum commitment was a profitable business. Private asylums proliferated in the 19th century because they were money-making enterprises. Some were legitimate medical institutions trying to treat mental illness. Many were essentially prisons for inconvenient people, operated for profit rather than patient welfare. The system's economic structure encouraged abuse and made it difficult to distinguish legitimate treatment from imprisonment for profit. Let's examine the experiences of working-class women committed to public asylums, women without wealth, whose families couldn't afford private institutions. You are a working-class woman, 30 years old, a domestic servant. You've been working for a wealthy family. You protest about poor working conditions and low pay. The family finds you difficult. They claim you've become mentally unstable. Talking back to employers is evidence of delusions of grandeur or moral insanity. The family has you examined by a parish doctor. He certifies you as insane based on their testimony that you've become troublesome and above your station. You are committed to a county asylum, a large public institution housing hundreds of pauper lunatics. County asylums are worse than private asylums. They're overcrowded, underfunded, understaffed. The conditions are horrific. You are housed in a ward with 50 other women in a space designed for 30. Beds are crammed together. There is no privacy, barely any space to move. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, overflowing chamber pots, the stench of too many people in too little space. The food is worse than in private asylums. Thin gruel, bread that is stale or mouldy, occasionally a tiny portion of meat. You are always hungry. The hunger is deliberate. Keeping patients underfed makes them weak and compliant. You don't have energy to cause trouble when you are starving. The attendants are even worse than in private asylums. They're paid very little to do terrible work. They take out their frustrations on patients. You are hit for minor infractions, or for no reason at all. Attendants steal from patients. What little you have can be taken with no recourse. If you are sexually assaulted by an attendant, reporting it is pointless. Who will believe an insane woman accusing a staff member? Treatment is minimal. Doctors visit the ward maybe once a week, spend minutes on rounds, barely look at individual patients. You are just one of hundreds. Unless you are violent and disruptive, you are ignored. You sit in the day room day after day. No treatment, no activity, nothing. You are warehoused, not treated. Your chances of getting out are minimal. Your family are working class. They can't afford lawyers to fight your commitment. You have no wealthy advocate to take up your case. Even if you are sane, even if your commitment was unjust, you are trapped. You might spend years here, decades, possibly your entire life. Many women committed to county asylums die there, buried in pauper graves, their names forgotten. According to research by Dr. Peter Bartlett at the University of Nottingham on Victorian pauper asylums, conditions in public institutions were appalling. Overcrowding, minimal food, brutal staff, and complete absence of meaningful treatment were the norm. The stated purpose was treating mental illness, but the real function was warehousing people society didn't want to deal with, the genuinely mentally ill, but also inconvenient people, difficult people, people whose families wanted them gone. Working-class women committed to public asylums had virtually no recourse and minimal chance of release. Let's examine the specific case of Rosina Bulwer-Lytton, a woman who fought back against attempted commitment and whose case created a public scandal. Rosina was born in 1802, married Edward Bulwer-Lytton, who became a famous novelist and politician in 1827. The marriage was deeply unhappy. Edward was unfaithful, temperamental, controlling. Rosina was intelligent, witty, and increasingly unwilling to tolerate his behavior. By the 1830s, the marriage had essentially ended. Edward and Rosina separated, but separation was complicated. Rosina had limited independent income and depended on Edward for financial support. Edward controlled how much money she received and frequently withheld funds to punish her for behavior he disapproved of. Rosina started writing novels, pamphlets, letters to newspapers. She was a talented writer, clever and cutting. She wrote publicly about her marriage, exposing Edward's infidelities and his mistreatment of her. This was scandalous. Wives weren't supposed to publicly criticize husbands. Rosina's writings made Edward look bad, which he found intolerable. In 1858, Edward decided to silence Rosina. He had her examined by 2 doctors who certified her as insane. The diagnosis was essentially that she was too angry, too obsessed with her grievances against him, unwilling to accept her situation. Her justified anger and her literary talent turned against her husband were interpreted as mental illness. Rosina was seized and taken to a private asylum in Brentford. She was locked in, told she was insane, subjected to asylum conditions. But Rosina was well known. Her novels had readers, her situation had sympathizers. Word of her commitment spread quickly. Journalists began investigating. The public was outraged. A famous woman writer locked away by her powerful husband seemed like obvious abuse of the commitment system. The public pressure was intense. Newspapers ran stories. Reformers took up her case. Edward was forced to release her after only 3 weeks, not because she was deemed sane, but because keeping her confined was creating such a scandal that it was politically damaging to him. After her release, Rosina continued writing and speaking publicly about her experience. She described asylum conditions, the ease with which sane women could be committed, the powerlessness of wives against husbands who controlled the commitment process. Her case contributed to growing public awareness of asylum abuse. But Rosina's victory was limited. She was never fully free of Edward's control. He still controlled her income, could still threaten her with recommitment. She lived the rest of her life in uncertain circumstances, dependent on his willingness to continue her financial support, always aware that he could have her committed again if she pushed too far. She died in 1882, having spent decades fighting for her freedom and dignity. According to research by biographer Marie Mulvey-Roberts on Rosina Bulwer-Lytton's life, her case exemplified how intelligent, articulate women were seen as dangerous threats to male authority. Rosina's writing ability, her public criticism of her husband, her refusal to be silent and submissive, all made her a target. Her commitment was clearly retaliatory, an attempt to silence her by labeling her insane. She escaped partly because she was famous, but also because she never stopped fighting and never accepted the label of insane that had been imposed on her. Let's examine the pseudo-scientific theories that justified committing intelligent women. Victorian medical texts are full of warnings about the dangers of female education and intellectual activity. You read a medical textbook from the 1870s. It explains that women's brains are smaller and less developed than men's. Women are naturally suited for domestic and emotional roles, not intellectual pursuits. The textbook warns that education and intellectual activity drain blood from women's reproductive organs to their brains. This causes the uterus and ovaries to atrophy. Women who study too much become sterile, develop nervous disorders, and eventually go insane. The educated woman is presented as a medical catastrophe, unable to fulfill her natural role as wife and mother, her body and mind damaged by unnatural intellectual strain. The textbook describes masturbatory insanity, mental illness supposedly caused by masturbation. Women who masturbate are said to develop hysteria, nymphomania, and progressive mental deterioration. The signs include reading romantic literature, having flushed cheeks, seeming distracted or dreamy, displaying nervous energy. Essentially, any sign of sexual or romantic feeling in young women is suspicious. The treatment for masturbatory insanity includes constant supervision, cold baths, bland diet, physical restraint of the hands, and in severe cases, surgical removal of the clitoris. Young women suspected of masturbating have been committed to asylums where they're prevented from any privacy, watched constantly, subjected to procedures designed to eliminate sexual feeling. The textbook discusses nymphomania, excessive sexual desire in women, but excessive is defined so broadly that almost any expression of female sexuality could qualify. A wife who enjoys sex too openly, who initiates with her husband, who seems to desire sex frequently, all can be signs of nymphomania, a form of insanity requiring treatment. The textbook also discusses hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis applied to women with almost any complaint. Anxiety, depression, physical pain, fatigue, digestive problems, fainting, crying, anger, all can be attributed to hysteria, supposedly caused by disturbances of the uterus and ovaries. Hysteria is considered an inherently female affliction. The recommended treatment is rest, isolation, bland diet, and submission to male medical authority. According to research by Dr. Evelyn Ender at Hunter College on Victorian medical discourse about women, these theories serve to pathologize normal female behavior and enforce gender conformity. Any deviation from the narrow Victorian ideal of femininity could be medicalized as mental or physical illness. Intelligent women were particularly targeted. Their intelligence was itself evidence of abnormality. The medical establishment provided supposedly scientific justification for social control of women, lending authority to practices that were actually about maintaining male power rather than genuine medical care. Let's examine the case of Emily Georgiana, Countess of Portsmouth, whose struggle for freedom from asylum confinement lasted decades. Emily was born in 1854, married the 6th Earl of Portsmouth in 1880. The marriage was arranged. Emily barely knew her husband before the wedding. She quickly discovered he was mentally unstable, possibly suffering from what we'd now recognize as schizophrenia. Emily's husband became increasingly violent and paranoid. He threatened her destroyed property, behaved erratically. Emily was frightened and wanted to leave. But leaving a marriage, especially for a noblewoman, was nearly impossible. Divorce required an Act of Parliament and was scandalous. Separation required her husband's agreement, or a legal proceeding that would expose private family matters publicly. Emily's family and her husband's family conspired on a solution. They would have Emily certified as insane. If she were insane, she could be confined to an asylum, her property could be controlled by trustees, and the family scandal could be contained. The fact that her husband was the one who was actually mentally ill didn't matter. He was a man, an earl. Emily was expendable. In 1885, Emily was certified as insane by 2 doctors who had been consulted by her family. She was taken to a private asylum. She protested vigorously that she was sane, that the insane person in her marriage was her husband, that this was a conspiracy to silence her and control her property. Her protests were noted as paranoid delusions. Emily spent years in the asylum. She was subjected to various treatments. She was kept isolated from anyone who might help her. But Emily was aristocratic, wealthy, technically, and determined. She managed to smuggle out letters. She contacted lawyers. She began a legal battle for her release. The legal proceedings dragged on for years. Emily had to prove her sanity while confined in an asylum, which is nearly impossible. Asylum conditions make anyone seem disturbed, and doctors testify that patients are insane, because that is what they're being paid to say. But Emily persisted. She gathered evidence. She testified. She fought every ruling against her. Finally, in the 1890s, after nearly a decade of confinement, Emily was released. She had been found sane. The commitment had been wrongful, but a decade of her life was gone. She had been imprisoned in her 20s and 30s, her prime years. Her health had been damaged by asylum treatments. Her reputation had been destroyed. She would always be the woman who had been in an asylum, which meant she would always be suspect. Emily spent her remaining years in relative obscurity. The public scandal of her case had ruined her socially. She died in 1919, having survived her wrongful commitment, but never fully recovering from it. According to research by historian Dr. Jonathan Andrews at the University of Edinburgh on aristocratic asylum commitments, Emily's case shows that even wealth and status didn't protect women from wrongful commitment if powerful men wanted them confined. The difference was that wealthy women sometimes had resources to fight back legally, while poor women had no such recourse. But fighting was exhausting, expensive, and often unsuccessful. Emily won her freedom but lost years of her life and her social standing in the process. Let's examine the specific horrors of asylum births. What happened to pregnant women confined in asylums? You are a young woman, 19 years old, who became pregnant out of wedlock. In Victorian society, this is a profound scandal. Your family is ashamed. They need to hide the pregnancy and the baby. You are certified as suffering from moral insanity. Having sex out of wedlock is evidence of moral defect, which is considered a form of mental illness. You are committed to an asylum. You are 7 months pregnant. You'll give birth in the asylum, and afterward the baby will be taken from you for adoption. You'll be kept in the asylum until your family decides you've been sufficiently punished and reformed. The asylum has a lying-in ward for pregnant patients and patients with infants. It is overcrowded, understaffed, unsanitary. You are given minimal prenatal care. No one checks your health or the baby's health regularly. You are just expected to carry the pregnancy and deliver when the time comes. Labour begins. You are brought to the lying-in ward. The conditions are nightmarish. You are in a room with several other women in various stages of labour and postpartum recovery. The noise is constant women screaming in labour, babies crying, attendants shouting. The smell is overwhelming blood, amniotic fluid, lochia, the smell of multiple women's birth fluids all mixed together. An asylum attendant, not a trained midwife, attends your labour. The attendant has no medical training. She knows to catch the baby when it comes out, and not much more. If there are complications, if the baby is malpositioned, if you hemorrhage, there is no skilled help. You either deliver successfully or you die. Many women die in asylum childbirths from complications that could have been managed with proper medical care. You deliver the baby. You are allowed to hold it briefly. Then it is taken away. You are told you'll never see this baby again. You are an unfit mother. You are insane. You are unmarried. The baby will be given to a proper family. You are not told where or to whom. Your baby disappears, and you have no rights to information or contact. After delivery, you are kept in the lying-in ward for recovery. But recovery in an asylum isn't real recovery. You are given minimal food, no rest. You are expected to return to regular asylum routine as soon as you can walk. You are leaking milk, bleeding heavily from postpartum lochia, your body traumatized from birth. But none of this matters. You are just another asylum inmate. The emotional trauma is profound. You've just given birth and had your baby taken away. You are hormonal, in pain, grieving. But grief is interpreted as mental illness. If you cry too much, you are sedated. If you express anger at having your baby taken, you are restrained. Your natural emotional response to an unnatural situation is treated as proof that you are insane. According to research by historian Dr. Hilary Marland on asylum childbirths, many unmarried pregnant women were committed to asylums in the 19th century as a way of hiding family scandal. They gave birth in terrible conditions, had babies taken from them, and were often kept confined long after the birth as continued punishment for sexual transgression. The babies born in asylums were adopted out, sent to foundling hospitals, or sometimes left to die of neglect. Many of these women were perfectly sane. Their only insanity was becoming pregnant without marriage. But that was sufficient grounds for confinement in Victorian society. Let's examine attempts at escape from asylums and what happened to women who tried. You've been confined for 6 months. You are in a private asylum, kept on a locked ward. You are determined to escape. You've been watching the patterns. When attendants make rounds, when doors are unlocked for meal delivery, which windows might be accessible. One afternoon, during a momentary lapse in supervision, you run. You make it to a door that has been left briefly unlocked. You get out of the ward into a corridor toward an exit. Your heart is pounding. Freedom is so close. You just need to get out of the building, away from the asylum, somewhere public where you can call for help. But attendants see you running. They chase. You are caught before you reach the exit. You are dragged back, fighting and screaming. You are terrified. You know you'll be punished for this escape attempt. Attempting to escape is seen as evidence of dangerous tendencies, of being unredeemable. You are put in isolation, a small, bare room, usually in the basement or a remote part of the building. There is nothing in the room except perhaps a mattress on the floor. The door locks from outside. There are no windows or only a very high, small window that admits minimal light. You are alone in darkness, silence, isolation. You are kept in isolation for days, maybe weeks. No human contact except when attendants bring minimal food or force you to use the toilet. The isolation is maddening. Sensory deprivation, loneliness, fear of being forgotten. Women have gone genuinely insane from extended isolation, which ironically validates the original diagnosis that they were insane. When you are released from isolation, you are put in restraints. Straitjacket or restraint chair or crib. You are kept restrained as punishment and as prevention of future escape attempts. The restraints are painful, humiliating, physically damaging. You develop sores from the restraints. Your muscles atrophy from inability to move. But this is considered appropriate treatment for a dangerous patient. Your escape attempt is noted in your file as proof of violent and dangerous tendencies. This makes it even less likely you'll be released. It is a catch-22. You try to escape because you are being wrongfully imprisoned, but trying to escape is used as evidence that you are dangerously insane and need to be imprisoned. According to research by Dr. Leonard Smith at the University of Birmingham on asylum records, escape attempts were relatively common and almost always unsuccessful. Asylums were designed as secure facilities, locked doors, barred windows, high walls. Even if a patient got outside the building, she was usually quickly recaptured. Asylum staff knew the area, had connections with local authorities. A woman in asylum clothes, alone, often confused and frightened, stood out. She'd be picked up and returned. Each failed escape attempt resulted in harsher confinement and more severe treatment. Let's examine a successful escape. The case of Lydia Foster, an American woman whose escape and subsequent advocacy exposed asylum abuses. Lydia was committed in 1888 in New York by her husband. She was sane but inconvenient. She had inherited property and wanted to control it herself. Her husband wanted the property. Lydia was confined in a private asylum. She observed everything carefully, the routines, the security weaknesses, which attendants were lazy or distracted. She befriended other patients, particularly those who were allowed some limited freedom to walk in the asylum grounds due to being considered non-dangerous. After months of planning, Lydia made her move. During an afternoon walk in the grounds, supervised by an inattentive attendant, Lydia and 2 other women simply walked away. They walked calmly out of the asylum grounds onto public streets, away from the asylum. By the time their absence was noticed, they had disappeared into the city. Lydia went immediately to a lawyer. She told her story, wrongfully committed by her husband, held against her will. desperate to fight for her freedom. The lawyer was skeptical at first. Was she actually insane? But Lydia's clarity, her documentation, her obvious sanity convinced him. He took her case. The legal battle was complex. Lydia had to prove she was sane while asylum doctors testified she was insane. She had to expose the financial motives behind her commitment, while her husband claimed to be a concerned spouse, acting in her best interest. But Lydia was compelling, intelligent, articulate, unmistakably sane. She won her case. She was legally declared sane and released from the asylum's legal custody. But Lydia didn't stop there. She began speaking publicly about asylum abuses. She described conditions. She exposed the ease of wrongful commitment. She advocated for legal reforms. She worked with other former asylum inmates to document their experiences. She lobbied legislators for changes to commitment laws. Lydia's activism contributed to some reforms in New York asylum laws in the 1890s. Requirements for commitment became slightly more stringent. Patients gained some minimal rights to legal representation. It wasn't enough. Asylum abuse continued, but it was progress, and it was partly due to Lydia's courage in escaping and speaking out. According to research by historian Dr. Marjorie Davies on asylum reform movements, successful escapes were rare but powerful. Women who escaped and then fought publicly for reform were crucial in exposing asylum abuses to the wider public. Their first-person testimony couldn't be dismissed as biased reporting. They had experienced asylum conditions directly. Women like Lydia Foster gave voices to thousands of women still trapped in asylums who had no way to tell their stories. Let's examine the final years of women who died in asylums. What happened to long-term inmates who never got out? You've been in the asylum for 20 years. You were committed at age 25 for being difficult. You had opinions. You resisted your husband's control. You are now 45 years old. You've spent more than a third of your life in this institution. You are institutionalized now, completely adapted to asylum life because you've had no choice. You no longer fight or protest. You've learned that fighting only results in punishment. You are docile, compliant, submissive. You do what you are told without resistance. Asylum staff consider you a good patient, quiet, manageable, no trouble. But this compliance doesn't lead to release. You are still certified as insane. The original diagnosis stands, and your years in the asylum are used as evidence that the diagnosis was correct. You've been here 20 years. Clearly you must be insane. Why else would you be here? It is circular logic, but it keeps you confined. Your body is failing from decades of asylum conditions. You are malnourished from years of inadequate diet. Your teeth are gone. They rotted and were extracted without anesthesia. Your body is hunched from years of sitting on hard benches with nothing to do. You have chronic infections from the unsanitary conditions. You look 60 or 70, not 45. Your mind has changed too. 20 years of institutional life has altered your cognition. You are institutionalized. You can't imagine life outside the asylum anymore. If someone offered you release, you might be frightened rather than glad. The outside world is unfamiliar, overwhelming. The asylum, horrible as it is all you know now. You have no family contact anymore. Your husband divorced you years ago or died. Your children, if you had any, don't know you or don't want to know you. You are alone in the asylum, a forgotten woman, waiting to die. When you finally die, maybe from pneumonia, maybe from infection, maybe just from the accumulated damage of decades of neglect, you are buried in the asylum cemetery. Your grave is marked with a number, not a name. The asylum cemetery is full of numbered graves, hundreds of forgotten women who died in confinement, who were never free, who are buried in anonymous graves as if they never existed as individuals. According to research by Dr. Catherine Colborne at the University of Waikato on long-term asylum inmates, many women spent decades confined in asylums, eventually dying there. These women became chronic cases. long-term patients considered incurable, warehoused until death. They lost contact with families, lost their identities, became just inmates defined by their patient numbers. Their lives were stolen by wrongful commitment, and their deaths were unmarked, unmourned, except perhaps by fellow inmates who had shared their suffering. Now, let's reflect on the systemic nature of this injustice. From the 1840s through the early 1900s, tens of thousands of women in Britain and America were confined in asylums. How many were genuinely mentally ill? How many were sane women committed for being inconvenient? We'll never know the full numbers, but evidence suggests a significant percentage of female asylum inmates were sane or only mildly troubled, not deserving of confinement. The system was designed to be abused. Commitment required minimal evidence. Once committed, getting out required convincing the very people who profited from keeping you confined. Every aspect of the system, legal, medical, economic, created incentives for wrongful commitment and barriers to release. Intelligent women were particularly vulnerable. A woman who read extensively, who had intellectual interests, who expressed opinions, all these marked her as potentially troublesome. Victorian society needed women to be submissive, domestic, focused on home and family. Women who wanted more, who demonstrated intelligence that could threaten male authority, had to be controlled. Asylums provided a socially acceptable way to remove inconvenient, intelligent women from society. The pseudo-scientific medical justifications, theories about women's delicate brains, about the dangers of female education, about reproductive organs, causing insanity, provided cover for social control. Doctors certified women as insane, not based on genuine medical assessment, but based on whether women conform to gender norms. Medical authority was used to enforce social conformity. The women who escaped Elizabeth Packard, Georgina Weldon, Lydia Foster, others were exceptional. They had intelligence, courage, some resources, and usually some element of luck. Most women weren't so fortunate. They remained confined, their stories untold, their lives stolen by a system that valued male authority over female freedom. Let's examine more specific cases that reveal the variety of reasons women were committed. Edith Lanchester was a 24-year-old woman living in London in 1895. She was educated, a socialist activist, and had decided to live with her partner without marrying. This free love arrangement was scandalous in Victorian society. Edith's father was horrified. An unmarried daughter living with a man would bring shame to the family. Edith's father and brothers conspired to have her committed. They hired Dr. George Fielding Blandford, a prominent alienist. Dr. Blandford examined Edith briefly and certified her as suffering from over-education. Yes, that was an actual diagnosis. The theory was that too much education had unbalanced Edith's mind, leading to her immoral decision to cohabit without marriage. Edith was forcibly taken from her home and brought to an asylum. But unlike many women, Edith had powerful allies. She was involved in socialist and labor movements. Her comrades were outraged at her commitment. They organized protests outside the asylum. They contacted newspapers, creating a public scandal. They hired lawyers to challenge the commitment. The public pressure worked. After only 4 days in the asylum, Edith was released. The doctors claimed she had been cured. Obviously, she hadn't been. She still held the same views and still intended to live with her partner. But the publicity made continuing her confinement politically impossible. After her release, Edith did live with her partner, eventually marrying him. She continued her activist work. She spoke publicly about her brief asylum experience and the ease with which sane women could be committed for holding unconventional views. Her case contributed to public debate about commitment laws and women's rights. According to research by historian Dr. Carolyn Conley at the University of Alabama on Edith Lanchester's case, her escape from longer confinement was due entirely to her connections and the speed with which her allies mobilized. Most women had no such organized support. They could be committed and simply disappear, with no one outside the family even knowing they'd been taken to an asylum. Edith's case shows both the vulnerability of all women to wrongful commitment and the power of collective action in resisting it. Let's examine the case of Agnes Richter, a German seamstress whose story reveals the international nature of asylum abuse. Agnes was born in 1844, worked as a seamstress, and at some point developed mental health problems, possibly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. She was committed to an Austrian asylum in 1895. Unlike many of the women we've discussed, Agnes may have had genuine mental illness, but what happened to her in the asylum reveals the conditions all women endured. Whether sane or actually ill, Agnes spent years in the asylum. She had no visitors, no family contact. She was given a straitjacket to wear. Apparently at some point she became agitated or resistant to asylum rules. Agnes, being a seamstress, did something extraordinary. She began embroidering her straitjacket. Over months or years she covered the entire garment with tiny meticulous embroidery. Words, letters, fragments of sentences, all sewn in tiny stitches onto the canvas fabric. The text is difficult to read, some words in German, some seemingly random letters, some possibly coded messages. The straitjacket became a text, Agnes's words literally woven into the instrument of her restraint. Agnes died in the asylum in 1918, having spent over 20 years confined. Her embroidered straitjacket was preserved and is now in a museum. Historians and psychiatrists have studied it, trying to decipher the text, to understand what Agnes was trying to communicate through her embroidery. The straitjacket is haunting, a beautiful, meticulous work of art created under the most oppressive conditions imaginable. Agnes was restrained in this garment, probably for days or weeks at a time, unable to move her arms. Yet she found a way to express herself, to leave a mark, to create something that would outlast her confinement and her life. According to research by textile historian Dr. Katrin Trautwein, who studied Agnes's straitjacket, the garment represents the creativity and resistance of asylum inmates. Even under total control, even when stripped of all autonomy, Agnes found a way to communicate, to create, to assert her humanity. The straitjacket, intended to restrain her, became a canvas for her self-expression. Whether Agnes was sane or genuinely mentally ill, her embroidered straitjacket testifies to the human spirit, persisting even in the most dehumanizing circumstances. Let's examine the specific ways doctors justified diagnosing women as insane. You are reading a Victorian medical textbook on female insanity, published in 1880. The author, a prominent alienist, categorizes various types of female madness. Each category reveals more about Victorian gender ideology than about actual mental illness. Puerperal insanity, madness following childbirth. The textbook explains that the physical and emotional strain of childbirth can cause women's delicate nervous systems to break down. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, inability to bond with the infant, expressing regret about motherhood, crying frequently. What we'd now recognize as postpartum depression is classified as insanity requiring potential asylum commitment. The textbook recommends isolation from the infant to prevent the insane mother from harming it, sedation with opiates, and in severe cases, removal to an asylum. Many women experiencing normal postpartum emotional difficulties have been committed to asylums, separated from their babies, treated as dangerously insane when they needed support and understanding. Climacteric insanity, madness associated with menopause. The textbook explains that when women's reproductive capacity ends, their entire identity and purpose ends too. The resulting existential crisis causes mental breakdown. Symptoms include depression, irritability, physical complaints, loss of interest in domestic duties. What the textbook doesn't acknowledge is that menopausal women might have legitimate reasons for depression unrelated to their reproductive status. decades of oppressive marriage, lost youth, lack of opportunities, watching their lives slip away. But these social and psychological causes are ignored. Menopause itself is treated as a cause of insanity. Masturbatory insanity. We've discussed this. But it is worth emphasizing how seriously Victorian medicine took this supposed diagnosis. The textbook devotes an entire chapter to the dangers of female masturbation. It describes lurid cases of young women who masturbated and subsequently became insane, developing nymphomania, moral degeneracy, and eventually complete mental collapse. The recommended treatments are horrific: constant supervision, cold baths, bland diet, mechanical restraints on the hands, surgical intervention. The textbook casually discusses clitoridectomy, surgical removal of the clitoris, as an appropriate treatment for habitual female masturbators. Many young women have had their genitals mutilated in the name of preventing or curing masturbatory insanity. Nymphomania. We've touched on this, but the textbook provides specific diagnostic criteria. A nymphomaniac is a woman with excessive sexual desire, but excessive is defined by Victorian standards of female sexual passivity. Signs include initiating sex with her husband more than occasionally, appearing to enjoy sex too openly, having sexual thoughts or fantasies, reading romantic literature, any expression of autonomous sexual desire. The treatment for nymphomania escalates from cold baths and dietary restrictions to gynecological interventions, cauterization of the genitals, removal of the clitoris, even removal of the ovaries. These are presented as medical treatments, not torture, but the line between treatment and punishment is non-existent. Moral insanity. This diagnosis is explicitly about behavior rather than delusions or hallucinations. A woman with moral insanity knows right from wrong, but chooses wrong anyway. Signs include theft, lying, adultery, promiscuity, defiance of authority, inappropriate anger, failure to fulfill domestic duties. Essentially, any immoral or socially inappropriate behavior can be evidence of moral insanity. The concept of moral insanity provides medical justification for committing women whose behavior is simply unacceptable to Victorian society. Prostitutes, petty criminals, women who have affairs, women who are rebellious or defiant, all can be diagnosed with moral insanity and committed to asylums for behavior that isn't actually evidence of mental illness, according to research by Dr. Janet Oppenheim at Brandeis University on Victorian psychiatric diagnosis. These categories of female insanity were more social control mechanisms than medical conditions. They pathologized normal female experiences, childbirth, menopause, normal sexual feelings, and any behavior that violated Victorian gender norms. The diagnostic categories gave medical authority to social judgments, making it seem scientific and objective when it was actually deeply biased. Let's examine the experience of women who were committed multiple times, women whose families used asylum commitment as ongoing threat and punishment. You are a woman who was committed once, spent 6 months in an asylum, and were eventually released. You are back home with your family, but everything has changed. You know they can commit you again at any time. You live in constant fear of being sent back to the asylum. You are extremely careful about your behavior. You never express anger, never disagree openly, never do anything that might be interpreted as signs of returning insanity. You are docile, submissive, trying desperately to avoid giving any excuse for recommitment. The threat of the asylum controls you more effectively than the actual confinement did. You are essentially imprisoned in your own home, policing your own behavior, living in terror. But despite your caution, you are committed again. Maybe you expressed an opinion your husband disapproved of. Maybe you spent money without permission. Maybe you just annoyed someone on a bad day. The reasons don't really matter. The power to commit you exists, and it is used whenever convenient. The second commitment is worse than the first. You know what to expect. You know the asylum conditions, the treatments, the hopelessness. The anticipatory dread is crushing. When the attendants come to take you away, you don't fight as hard as you did the first time. You are already broken by the knowledge of what is coming. In the asylum, you are marked as a repeat patient. The staff treat you as genuinely and chronically insane. You've been here before. Clearly you are really mad, and the first release was premature. You are subjected to harsher treatment. You are considered more dangerous, more in need of control. Your chances of release are lower because your second commitment is used as evidence that the first diagnosis was correct. Some women are committed 3, 4, 5 times over years or decades. Each commitment breaks them further. Eventually, they give up fighting. They accept the label of insane. They become institutionalized, unable to function outside asylum walls even if released. The repeated commitments become self-fulfilling prophecies. Sane women driven genuinely insane by repeated traumatic confinement. According to research by historian Dr. Stephen Garton at University of Sydney on patterns of asylum commitment, repeat commitments were common, especially for women. Once a woman had been committed once, recommitment was easier. Her file existed. The diagnosis was on record, and asylum doctors were willing to accept her as a known patient rather than requiring extensive new evaluation. Families used repeated commitment as a control mechanism, knowing they could send a difficult woman back to the asylum whenever convenient. The asylum became a permanent threat hanging over women's lives. Let's examine the case of Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of Abraham Lincoln, whose commitment after his assassination reveals how even first ladies were not safe from asylum abuse. Mary was born in 1818, married Abraham Lincoln in 1842. After Abraham's assassination in 1865, Mary was devastated by grief. She had already lost 2 sons. Now she'd lost her husband in a violent, traumatic way. Mary's behaviour in her grief concerned her surviving son, Robert. She spent money freely on clothes and household items, apparently trying to fill the void in her life. She believed she was being followed and that people were trying to poison her, possibly symptoms of paranoia, possibly justified given the political tensions after the assassination. She held seances trying to contact Abraham and their dead sons. She was impulsive, emotional, difficult. In 1875, Robert had his mother committed to Bellevue Place, a private asylum in Illinois. The trial was perfunctory. Witnesses testified about Mary's odd behaviour. Doctors agreed she was insane, and she was committed despite her protests. Mary was 56 years old, a former First Lady, and she was being locked in an asylum by her own son. At Bellevue Place, Mary was subjected to asylum conditions. She was watched constantly, allowed no privacy. Her spending and independence, which Robert had used as evidence of her insanity, were now completely controlled by him. As her legal guardian, she had no access to her money, couldn't make decisions about her own life. Mary began a covert campaign for release. She smuggled out letters to friends and lawyers. She contacted newspaper editors. She insisted she was sane, that her commitment was Robert's attempt to control her money and silence her. She was strategic and persistent. After 3 months, with the help of feminist activists and sympathetic lawyers, Mary was released from Bellevue Place. She had been found restored to reason. The doctors suddenly agreed she was sane, probably due to political pressure rather than any actual change in her condition. But Mary's relationship with Robert was destroyed. She lived the rest of her life estranged from her only surviving child. She eventually moved to Europe, partly to escape the stigma of having been in an asylum. She died in 1882, having spent her final years in obscurity and sadness, still haunted by the asylum commitment. Mary Todd Lincoln's case is debated by historians. Was she genuinely mentally ill, or was she a grieving woman whose unconventional behaviour was pathologized? Evidence suggests both. She had genuine psychological problems, likely depression and anxiety from trauma, but those problems didn't necessarily require asylum commitment. In a different era or with a different family, She might have received support rather than confinement, according to research by historian Dr. Jason Emerson, who studied Mary Todd Lincoln's asylum commitment. Her case shows that no woman, regardless of status, was safe from wrongful or excessive commitment. Even a former First Lady could be locked away if family members decided it was convenient. The commitment left permanent scars on Mary's reputation and mental health. She died knowing that she'd been judged insane, had been institutionalized, and that history would remember her partly for this humiliation, rather than for her genuine accomplishments as First Lady during the Civil War. Let's examine the specific experience of young women committed for sexual nonconformity, women whose sexuality was pathologized. You are 18 years old, living with your parents in Victorian London. You've been discovered in a relationship with another young woman. Homosexuality is not only illegal, but considered a form of mental illness in women. Your parents are horrified and ashamed. They consult with a doctor. He examines you and diagnoses you with moral insanity with perverted sexual instincts. Your same-sex attraction is classified as mental defect. You need treatment to correct your unnatural desires and prevent you from corrupting other young women. You are committed to an asylum specializing in treating moral defects in young women. At the asylum, you are told repeatedly that your attraction to women is sick, wrong, evidence of mental disease. You are subjected to treatments designed to correct your sexuality. These might include isolation to prevent contact with other women, forced exposure to men. Some asylums had male staff deliberately interact with female patients to awaken normal sexual feelings, religious counseling emphasizing the sinfulness of your desires. You might be subjected to aversion therapy, shown images of women while being given drugs that cause nausea, or while being subjected to electric shocks, training your brain to associate female images with pain or illness. This early form of conversion therapy is brutal and ineffective, but asylum doctors believe it can cure your perversion. You are kept at the asylum until you convincingly perform heterosexuality. You must show interest in men, express disgust at your previous same-sex attractions, demonstrate that you've been cured. If you resist, if you maintain that your attractions are natural and not sick, you are kept confined indefinitely. Your honest refusal to pretend you've changed is taken as evidence that you are not yet cured. Many young lesbian or bisexual women spent years in asylums, subjected to treatments meant to change their sexuality. Some eventually performed the expected heterosexuality convincingly enough to be released, though their actual orientations hadn't changed. Others refused to perform and remained confined. Some were permanently damaged by the treatments, developed genuine mental illness from the trauma, or were physically harmed by the interventions. According to research by Dr. Laura Doan at the University of Manchester on Victorian attitudes toward female homosexuality, same-sex attracted women were caught between invisibility and pathologization. Female homosexuality was so unthinkable to Victorians that it was rarely acknowledged. The law didn't even criminalize it because legislators couldn't imagine women actually doing sexual things with each other. But when it was discovered, it was treated as extreme mental defect requiring drastic intervention. Many same-sex attracted women were committed to asylums, subjected to cruel treatments, and either forced to hide their true selves or remain confined indefinitely. Let's examine the economic class dimensions more deeply. How poor women's experiences differed from wealthy women's. You are a working-class woman, a factory worker, 25 years old. You've been organising other workers, pushing for better wages and conditions. The factory owner finds this troublesome. He can't legally fire you for organising, but he can have you certified as insane. The factory owner pays a doctor to examine you. The doctor certifies you as suffering from moral insanity. Your attempts to organise workers is evidence of delusions of grandeur, inappropriate behaviour for your station, possibly revolutionary mania. You are committed to a county asylum. The county asylum is far worse than private asylums we've described. It is massively overcrowded. Wards designed for 40 patients house 80. The beds are so close together you are touching the women on either side of you. There is no privacy, barely any space to move. The food is starvation level, thin gruel twice a day, maybe a piece of bread. You are constantly hungry. The hunger weakens you, makes you compliant, makes resistance difficult. This is partly intentional, keeping patients underfed, makes them manageable. The staff are brutal. They're poorly paid, overworked, dealing with impossible conditions. They take out their frustrations on patients. You are hit for minor infractions. You are sexually assaulted by male attendants who know you have no recourse, who will believe an insane woman in a county asylum. Medical treatment is non-existent. A doctor might walk through the ward once a week, but he doesn't really look at individual patients. You are just one of hundreds of pauper lunatics warehoused because society doesn't want to deal with you. No one is trying to cure you. They're just storing you until you die. You have no advocates. Your family are working class. They can't afford lawyers. You have no wealthy friends to take up your cause. The labour organisers you worked with might try to help, but they have limited power against the asylum system. You are essentially disappeared, removed from society, locked away, forgotten. You might spend the rest of your life in this county asylum. Decades of starvation, brutality, sexual abuse, complete absence of hope. You'll probably die there, from disease, from violence, from suicide, from the general effects of decades of institutional neglect. You'll be buried in a pauper's grave, unnamed, unremembered. According to research by Dr. David Wright at McGill University on class differences in asylum commitment and treatment, working-class women in public asylums faced far worse conditions than wealthy women in private institutions. The differences weren't just in physical comfort. Public asylums were fundamentally different institutions. Private asylums at least pretended to be medical facilities treating illness. Public asylums were warehouses for unwanted people. Working-class women committed to public asylums had almost no chance of release and minimal chance of survival in decent health. Let's examine the case of Annie Cook, a working-class woman whose story illuminates the powerlessness of poor women against asylum commitment. Annie was born in London in 1875, worked in a factory from age 12. In 1895, at age 20, she was sexually assaulted by her employer. Annie reported the assault to police. The employer, a wealthy businessman, had influence. He claimed Annie was mentally unstable, that she'd invented the assault story as a delusion. The employer paid for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctor examined Annie briefly and diagnosed her with erotomania, delusional belief that someone of higher status is in love with her, leading to false accusations of sexual contact. This was a convenient diagnosis for discrediting rape victims. Their accusations could be dismissed as insane delusions. Annie was committed to a county asylum. She insisted the assault was real, that she wasn't delusional. Her insistence was taken as further evidence of her mental illness. Inability to accept reality is a classic symptom of insanity. The doctors said Annie was kept at the asylum for 2 years. During that time, she was sexually assaulted by asylum staff, male attendants who had complete power over vulnerable female patients. When she tried to report these assaults, she was told she was having delusions again. Her genuine victimization was used as evidence that she was still insane and still experiencing erotic delusions. Annie was eventually released when the asylum needed her bed for new patients. She went back to her family, but she was damaged physically from asylum conditions, psychologically from repeated trauma, socially from the stigma of having been in an asylum. She found it difficult to get work. Potential employers didn't want to hire someone who'd been certified insane. Annie's later life is unknown. She disappears from historical records. Probably she lived in poverty. Possibly she died young. Her story was preserved only because an asylum reformer documented it as an example of how asylum systems were used to silence sexual assault victims. and protect powerful perpetrators. According to research by historian Dr. Judith Walkowitz on Victorian sexual violence and institutional responses, Annie Cook's case was not unique. Sexual assault victims were sometimes certified as insane to discredit their testimony. The diagnosis of erotomania or similar disorders provided a medical explanation for why women accused respectable men. They were delusional, seeing sexual interest or assault where none existed. This protected male perpetrators while silencing and institutionalizing their victims. Let's examine the gradual reforms that eventually limited asylum abuse changes that came too late for thousands of women, but that eventually made wrongful commitment somewhat more difficult. The Lunacy Act of 1890 in England was a significant reform. It responded to years of scandal cases like Louisa Nottage's, like Rosina Bulwer Lytton's, like the many exposes by Elizabeth Packard and other activists. The 1890 Act required that commitment be certified by 2 doctors rather than 1. The doctors had to personally examine the patient, not just rely on family members' descriptions. The examination had to be documented with specific symptoms observed. This made casual commitment slightly more difficult. The Act also created the commissioners in lunacy, officials who could inspect asylums and investigate complaints. Patients gained the theoretical right to appeal their commitments, though in practice this was difficult to exercise from inside an asylum. The Act represented recognition that asylum abuse was real and needed legal constraints, but the reforms were limited. 2 doctors could still be found who would cooperate with families wanting to commit someone. The examination requirements could be satisfied with minimal effort. A brief interview, noting a few behaviours that could be interpreted as symptoms. Once committed, getting out still required convincing asylum authorities, which was extremely difficult. Moreover, the reforms didn't address the fundamental problem, the medical pathologization of normal female behaviour. Women were still diagnosed as insane for being too intellectual, too sexual, not sexual enough, too independent, too angry. The diagnostic categories hadn't changed. Only the procedures for commitment had added some minimal checks. Progress continued slowly through the early 20th century. Women gaining the vote, 1918 for some women, 1928 for all adult women in Britain, meant women had political power to push for reforms. The rise of psychoanalysis and new psychiatric paradigms gradually shifted understanding of mental illness. The worst excesses of Victorian asylum practice were slowly reformed, but meaningful change came slowly. Into the 1950s and beyond, women could still be committed for behaviour that violated gender norms. Housewives diagnosed with nervous breakdowns were subjected to electroshock therapy and lobotomies. Lesbian women were committed for conversion therapy. Rebellious daughters were institutionalized by frustrated parents. The patterns persisted well into the modern era, according to research by Dr. Nancy Tomes on psychiatric reform movements. Reform was gradual and incomplete. Each scandal would produce incremental changes, but the fundamental power structures remained. Families retained significant power to initiate commitments. Doctors retained power to diagnose based on subjective judgments. Asylums retained power to keep patients confined. Only very gradually over decades were meaningful protections put in place. And even today, concerns remain about involuntary psychiatric commitment and the potential for abuse. Let's examine one final case that demonstrates the international scope of this issue. Ursule Rouy, a French woman whose commitment and eventual escape made her famous. Ursule was born in 1850, married at age 20. The marriage was unhappy. Ursule was intelligent, strong-willed, and unwilling to tolerate her husband's infidelities and abuse. She wanted to separate, which was scandalous in 1870s France. In 1876, Ursule's husband had her committed to an asylum in Paris. The certification was signed by 2 doctors who had barely examined her. The diagnosis was essentially that she was a difficult wife, too independent, too unwilling to submit. Hercely was 26 years old when she was locked in the asylum. Hercely spent 3 years in the asylum. During that time, she carefully observed everything: the conditions, the other patients, the injustices of the system. She began documenting everything in secret writings. She planned her eventual escape and the campaign she would wage for reform. In 1879, Hercely was released. The asylum claimed she had been cured, though her views and personality hadn't changed. More likely, her husband no longer wanted to pay for her confinement, or the asylum needed the bed. Whatever the reason, she was free. Hercely immediately began writing and speaking about her experience. In 1883, she published a memoir, Memoirs d'une alien, Memoirs of an Asylum Inmate. The book was a sensation. It exposed asylum conditions from inside, described how easily sane women could be committed, and called for reforms. Hercely became a prominent campaigner for asylum reform in France. She gave public lectures, wrote articles, lobbied legislators. She advocated for requiring more stringent evidence for commitment, for giving patients legal representation, for regular inspection of asylums by independent authorities. Hercely's activism contributed to reforms in French asylum laws in the 1880s and 1890s. The changes were incomplete. Asylum abuse continued. But they added some protections that made wrongful commitment somewhat more difficult. Hercely continued her advocacy until her death in 1908, having spent over 25 years fighting the system that had imprisoned her. According to research by historian Dr. Lawrence Guinard at the University of Angers on Hercely Roux's case and activism, her story shows that the problem of wrongful asylum commitment was international. France, Britain, America, Germany all had similar systems that could be abused similarly. Women everywhere faced the threat of being labelled insane and locked away for violating gender norms. Hercely's courage in speaking out, in publishing her memoir, despite the social stigma, helped create pressure for reform across Europe. Now let's reflect on what this history means. From roughly 1840 to 1920, tens of thousands of women in Western countries were locked in asylums. Many were genuinely mentally ill and needed help, though the help they received was often brutal and ineffective. But many women were sane. They were committed for being too intelligent, reading too much, having political opinions, refusing to submit to husbands, expressing anger, wanting control of their own money, having or refusing sex at inappropriate times, masturbating or being suspected of masturbating, having same-sex attractions, getting pregnant outside marriage, being too independent, wanting an education, disagreeing with male relatives, inconveniencing men who had power over them. The asylum system was a mechanism of social control dressed up as medicine. Doctors provided supposedly scientific justifications for enforcing Victorian gender norms. Asylums provided places to store women who didn't conform. Commitment laws made it easy to remove inconvenient women and difficult for those women to regain freedom. Intelligence in women was seen as dangerous because it threatened male authority. A woman who could read, think, and form her own opinions was harder to control than an ignorant woman. An intelligent woman might question her circumstances, might demand rights, might refuse to accept subordination. Better to label her insane and lock her away before she became too dangerous. The women who resisted, who escaped, who fought legal battles, who became activists, created slow change. Elizabeth Packard's decades of activism contributed to reforms in commitment laws. Georgina Weldon's public campaign exposed asylum abuses. Hercely Roux's memoir gave voice to asylum inmates. These women and others like them fought back against a system designed to silence them. They refused to accept the label of insane. They insisted on their sanity, their rights, their humanity. Their resistance mattered. The reforms they pushed for, while incomplete, eventually made asylum abuse more difficult. Their stories inspired other women to resist, to fight, to refuse to accept wrongful confinement. Their courage in the face of enormous power imbalances created the foundation for later women's rights movements. We owe them remembrance. We owe them acknowledgement of what was done to them. We owe them continued vigilance against systems that pathologize normal female behavior or that use medical authority to enforce social conformity. Let's examine the daily psychological torture of asylum life in more detail. The mental suffering that accompanied the physical deprivation. You've been in the asylum for 3 months. Every morning, you wake with the same crushing realization. You are still here. You are still labelled insane. You are still trapped. The hope that this is a nightmare you'll wake from has faded. This is your reality. You spend hours every day trying to convince staff, doctors, anyone who will listen that you are sane. You explain your situation rationally, calmly. You present evidence of your sanity, your ability to reason, your knowledge, your education. But everything you say is filtered through the lens of your diagnosis. Your rational explanations are confabulation, the insane making up stories. Your calm demeanour is cunning, the dangerous quality of high-functioning madness. Your education is excessive intellectualism, the very thing that drove you mad. You watch other women in the asylum. Some are genuinely suffering from serious mental illness, hallucinating, catatonic, unable to care for themselves. You feel profound sympathy for them. But you also see women like yourself, articulate, rational, clearly sane. You make cautious friends with these women. You whisper together when attendants aren't listening. You share your stories, how you ended up here, what you were accused of, what you did to anger the men who committed you. These conversations are dangerous. If caught talking together, you are separated. Attendants fear that sane patients will conspire to escape or will agitate each other. You learn to communicate in glances, in subtle gestures. You develop a silent language of solidarity with the other wrongfully committed women. The uncertainty is torture. You don't know how long you'll be here. No one tells you. There is no end date to your sentence. You could be here for months, years, decades. You might die here. This uncertainty gnaws at you constantly. Time becomes elastic. Days feel like weeks, weeks blur together. You lose track of how long you've been confined. Is it 3 months or 4? Without calendars, without routine markers of time, everything blends together. You fantasize about escape constantly. You map the asylum in your mind, where the exits are, where the unlocked doors might be, when attendants are most distracted. But you also know the risks. Failed escape attempts result in harsher punishment, isolation, restraints, being marked as dangerous, which makes eventual release even less likely. You weigh the risks constantly, unsure whether attempting escape is brave or foolish. The monotony itself is a form of torture. Every day is the same. Wake, eat thin porridge. Sit in the day room staring at walls. Eat thin soup. Sit more, sleep. No books, no work, no mental stimulation of any kind. Your mind, a mind that got you committed for being too active, too intelligent, is starving. You try to keep it engaged by reciting poetry you've memorized, by doing mathematical problems in your head, by mentally writing letters you'll never be able to send. But the monotony grinds you down. You notice yourself changing. You are becoming institutionalized. You are adapting to asylum life because you have no choice. You learn the unwritten rules. Don't look attendants in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never complain. Accept whatever treatment is given without protest. You are learning to be docile, submissive, invisible. You are becoming what they want you to be. But in the process, you are losing yourself. The worst moments are when you wonder if they're right. Maybe you are insane. Maybe your belief that you are sane is itself a delusion. Maybe everyone else can see something about you that you can't see about yourself. These doubts are the deepest torture. They threaten your sense of self, your understanding of reality. You fight these doubts desperately, clinging to your knowledge of your own sanity. But months of everyone around you insisting you are insane takes a psychological toll. According to research by sociologist Irving Goffman on total institutions, Asylums use the complete control of patients' lives to reshape their identities through constant assertion of the patient's insanity, through punishment for any resistance, through rewards for compliance. Asylums broke down patients' sense of self and rebuilt them as docile inmates. This process worked on sane and insane patients alike. Sane women committed to asylums often did develop mental health problems, not because they were insane to begin with, but because the asylum experience was so traumatic it created genuine psychological damage. Let's examine the specific experience of highly educated women in asylums. Woman with university education or professional training. You are a 30-year-old woman with a medical degree, rare but not impossible in the 1890s. You've been practicing as a physician for 3 years. You are competent, respected by your patients, but deeply resented by male colleagues who believe women shouldn't be doctors. One male colleague launches a campaign against you. He claims you are emotionally unstable, not suited to the strain of medical practice. He says you've made errors in treatment. You haven't, but he manufactures evidence. He suggests you are suffering from brain fever brought on by excessive education. Other male doctors, feeling threatened by your success, support his claims. You are brought before a medical board. The board is all men. They're your colleagues, but they're also your competitors. They examine you, asking questions designed to trap you. If you defend yourself confidently, you are displaying inappropriate masculine assertiveness. If you show any emotion at being falsely accused, you are displaying feminine hysteria. There is no right way to behave. That will save you. The board certifies you as suffering from mental breakdown due to the strain of pursuing a profession unsuited to your sex. You are committed to an asylum. Your medical license is revoked. Your career is destroyed. You are 30 years old, highly educated, professionally accomplished, and you are being locked in an asylum because men found you threatening. In the asylum, your medical knowledge becomes a liability. You can see that the treatments being used are medically unsound. You try to explain to asylum doctors that their methods are ineffective or harmful. They interpret your medical knowledge as delusions of being a physician. They know you have a medical degree, but they frame it as your delusion being that you are qualified to practice medicine, that you are as competent as male doctors. Your intelligence and education make you particularly frustrating to asylum staff. You question their procedures. You can articulate exactly why what they're doing is wrong. You won't be docile and accept their authority blindly. This makes you a difficult patient, which results in harsher treatment. You are kept in the asylum for 2 years. By the time you are released, your career is unrecoverable. You are known as the woman doctor who went mad, who couldn't handle the strain of her profession. You can't get your medical license reinstated. Who would give a license to someone who has been in an asylum? Your years of education, your professional promise, your career, all destroyed as punishment for succeeding in a male-dominated field. According to research by Dr. Regina Marantz Sanchez on women physicians in the 19th century, female doctors faced enormous obstacles, including claims that the mental strain of medical practice would drive them insane. Some women doctors were indeed committed to asylums, their commitment sometimes motivated by professional rivalry rather than genuine mental illness. The asylum system was weaponized against women who entered male-dominated professions, used to prove that women couldn't handle professional or intellectual work without breaking down mentally. Let's examine the intersection of asylum commitment and inheritance. Cases where women were committed specifically to seize their property. You are a 45-year-old spinster, never married, a woman of independent means thanks to an inheritance from your father. You live alone, manage your own affairs, and have strong opinions about politics and social issues. You've never been particularly concerned with what society thinks of your unconventional lifestyle. Your male cousins are your legal heirs. If you die without children, your property passes to them. but you've decided to change your will. You are leaving your substantial property to various charities and reform organisations rather than to your cousins. This infuriates them. They stand to inherit thousands of pounds, and you are giving it away to causes they despise: women's suffrage, workers' rights, education for the poor. Your cousins plot together. They need you declared legally incompetent before you can finalise the new will. They hire a solicitor who specialises in these matters, someone who knows cooperative doctors. They arrange for 2 physicians to examine you. The examination is perfunctory. The doctors spend 20 minutes asking questions designed to elicit responses that can be interpreted as eccentric or irrational. You speak passionately about political reform. The doctors note excessive concern with political matters inappropriate to her sex. You mention your charitable intentions. The doctors note delusions regarding proper disposal of inherited property. You express anger at your cousin's interference in your affairs. The doctors note paranoid ideation regarding family members. Everything you say is twisted into evidence of mental defect. You are certified as incapable of managing your affairs due to mental weakness. You are not immediately committed to an asylum. That would be too obvious. Instead, your cousins become your legal guardians, taking control of your property. You are effectively kept under house arrest in your own home, with servants who report to your cousins, monitoring your every move. You try to contact your solicitor to fight this, but your letters are intercepted. You try to leave your house to seek legal help, but the servants physically prevent you. You are a prisoner in your own home, watching your property being stolen legally while you are powerless to stop it. When you become too vocal in your protests, when you make too much trouble, your cousins take the final step. They have you committed to an asylum. Now you are both silenced and completely stripped of legal rights. Your property is entirely under their control. They can sell it, spend it, do whatever they want. You are locked in an asylum, labelled insane, with no recourse. This scenario played out hundreds of times in Victorian England. Single women with property, widows with inheritances, any woman with significant wealth who didn't have male relatives who would unquestionably inherit, all were vulnerable. The incentive to have them declared insane was enormous. The process was easy. The legal system supported it. According to research by economic historian Dr. Amy Louise Erickson on women's property rights in 19th century England, the vulnerability of women's property was a significant motivation for wrongful asylum commitments. Before the Married Women's Property Acts 1870-1882, married women had virtually no property rights, but single and widowed women did have property rights which made them targets. Declaring them insane was a way to seize their property legally. The asylum system facilitated what was essentially theft dressed up as medical necessity and family concern. Let's examine the experience of immigrant women committed to asylums, women who faced additional vulnerabilities due to language barriers and cultural differences. You are a 35-year, old Italian immigrant woman living in London in 1900. You speak limited English. You work in a garment factory with other Italian women. You maintain Italian customs and traditions, which your English neighbours find strange. Your husband dies in a factory accident. You are left with 3 young children and no income beyond what you can earn. The charitable organisation that provides some widows' relief decides you need oversight. A foreign woman alone with children might not raise them properly in English ways. They assign you a charitable visitor who reports on your household management. The visitor is appalled by what she sees as disorder and foreign strangeness. You cook Italian food, which smells different from English food. You gesture expressively when you speak, which seems overly emotional. You are loud. Italian conversational style is louder than reserved English style. You discipline your children with occasional smacking, which was common in Italy but is increasingly disapproved in England. Everything about you seems wrong to the visitor's English. middle-class sensibilities. The visitor reports that you are an unfit mother, too emotional, too foreign in your ways, possibly mentally unstable. She recommends you be examined. A doctor is sent. You speak limited English. The doctor doesn't speak Italian. He asks you questions you don't fully understand. You answer as best you can, but your limited English and confusion make your answers seem confused and irrational. The doctor diagnoses you with feeble-mindedness aggravated by racial inferiority. Yes, that was an actual diagnostic category, reflecting Victorian racism. Your foreignness itself is pathologized as evidence of mental deficiency. You are committed to an asylum. Your children are taken into institutional care. They'll be raised properly English, away from your corrupting foreign influence. In the asylum, your language barrier makes everything worse. You can't understand what staff are saying to you. You can't explain yourself, can't protest, can't communicate your needs. Your attempts to speak Italian are silenced. You are in England now. You must speak English. Your inability to communicate in English is taken as evidence of severe mental deficiency, rather than simply being a language barrier. You are surrounded by English women with English cultural assumptions. Everything you do that is culturally Italian is interpreted as mad behavior. You cross yourself and pray in Italian. This is religious mania. You mourn expressively for your dead husband with Italian dramatic mourning rituals. This is excessive emotionality, typical of hysteria. You are simply being Italian, but in an English asylum, being Italian is evidence of insanity. You have no advocates. Your Italian immigrant community doesn't even know you are in an asylum. You disappear from your neighborhood, and people assume you moved away or went back to Italy. Your children are told their mother is dead or has abandoned them. You are trapped, unable to communicate, unable to explain, unable to bridge the language and cultural gap that has been interpreted as mental illness. According to research by Dr. Lynn Falwell on immigrant women in Victorian England, foreign women were particularly vulnerable to being pathologized as mentally ill. Language barriers, cultural differences, poverty, and lack of social connections all made immigrant women targets for asylum commitment. The asylum system was used as part of broader efforts to control and reform immigrant populations, particularly women who were seen as not conforming to English standards of proper feminine behaviour. Let's examine the long-term effects on women who were eventually released from asylums, how the experience damaged them for life. You are released after 18 months in an asylum. You were wrongfully committed by your husband, but he has agreed to your release because he has found a new woman and wants a divorce. You are free. You should be happy, but you are not. You are profoundly damaged. Physically, you are weakened. The poor food, the lack of exercise, the asylum treatments, all have taken a toll. You are thinner, paler, aged beyond your years. You have chronic health problems that will persist for life. If you were subjected to gynecological interventions, you might be infertile or in chronic pain. The physical scars are permanent. Psychologically, you are traumatized. You have nightmares about the asylum. Loud noises make you panic. They sound like asylum chaos. Being confined in any way triggers intense anxiety. You struggle with trust. How can you trust anyone when the system that was supposed to protect you instead imprisoned you? The trauma is profound and persistent. You don't have language to call it PTSD. That term won't exist for decades. But that is what you are experiencing. Socially, you are ruined. You are a woman who was in an asylum. Everyone knows. You are marked permanently. Potential employers don't want someone who was certified insane. Men don't want to court a woman with such a stigma. Who wants to marry someone who has been in an asylum? Your family is ashamed and distances themselves from you. You are an embarrassment, a source of gossip, always suspect. You can't speak openly about what happened to you. If you describe the wrongfulness of your commitment, you sound paranoid. They were all against me, conspiring to lock me up for no reason. The truth sounds like paranoid delusion. If you describe asylum abuses, you sound like you are making up horror stories or exaggerating. The truth is so terrible that people don't want to believe it. Find it easier to assume you are still somewhat mentally unstable. You struggle with your identity. For 18 months, everyone told you you were insane. Even though you knew they were wrong, even though you maintained your sanity, the constant assertion that you were mad has affected you. You second-guess yourself constantly. You monitor your own thoughts and behaviors anxiously. Is this normal? Am I being irrational? The self-doubt never fully goes away. You are changed. The experience has hardened you in some ways, broken you in others. You are more cautious, more fearful, more aware of your powerlessness as a woman in Victorian society. But you are also angrier, more determined to expose injustice, more sympathetic to other women's suffering. The asylum changed you in ways you are still discovering years later. According to research by psychologist Dr. Richard Bentall on effects of wrongful psychiatric confinement, the trauma of being labelled insane and imprisoned produces long-lasting psychological effects even after release. Former asylum inmates experience ongoing stigma, difficulty reintegrating into society, and symptoms of trauma. Many never fully recover their pre-asylum lives. The experience marks them permanently, affecting relationships, employment, and sense of self for the rest of their lives. Let's examine a final case that shows the international reach of these abuses. Zelma O'Neill, an American dancer and actress who was committed multiple times in the 1940s to 50s, showing that these patterns persisted well into the 20th century. Zelma was born in 1903, became a successful performer in vaudeville and early Hollywood. She was talented, beautiful, and had a career she controlled. In the 1940s, Zelma married several times. Her marriages were brief and turbulent. She drank heavily, was emotionally volatile, and struggled with the decline of her career as she aged. In 1945, one of her ex-husbands had her committed to a psychiatric hospital in California. The diagnosis was manic depressive psychosis and alcoholism with psychotic features. Zelma was held in the hospital for several months. She was given electroshock therapy, a treatment that was supposed to help with depression, but that often caused memory loss and other side effects. When she was released, she had gaps in her memory, and her career prospects were further damaged by her hospitalization. But Zelma was committed again in 1950, again in 1954. Each commitment was initiated by a different ex-husband or family member. Each time she protested that she wasn't insane, that she was being railroaded by vindictive ex-husbands. Each time, her protests were interpreted as lack of insight into her condition. By the time of her final release in the late 1950s, Zelma was broken. The repeated commitments, the electroshock treatments, the medications, the constant labeling as mentally ill, all had taken their toll. She died in 1989, having spent her final decades in obscurity, her once promising career destroyed partly by her own struggles, but largely by the psychiatric system that had labelled and confined her repeatedly. Zelma's case is complicated. She did struggle with alcoholism and emotional problems, but the repeated commitments, often initiated by ex-husbands during divorce proceedings, suggest the asylum system was being used to control and punish her rather than genuinely help her. The pattern of women being committed by male ex-partners, the difficulty of distinguishing genuine mental illness from trauma responses to abuse, the way the system could be weaponized against difficult women. All these Victorian-era patterns persisted well into the modern era. According to research by film historian Dr. Jeanine Basinger on women in early Hollywood, female performers faced particular vulnerabilities. Their careers depended on youth and beauty, which were fleeting. Their unconventional lifestyles, the touring, the public performances, the financial independence, made them suspect. When their careers declined or when they became difficult, They were vulnerable to being labelled mentally ill. Some genuinely struggled with mental health. Others were targeted for being inconvenient. The line between treatment and punishment was often unclear. Let's examine the children of committed women, what happened to them when their mothers disappeared into asylums. You are 8 years old. Your mother has been taken away. Your father tells you she has gone to a hospital because she is sick in the mind. You don't understand. Your mother seemed fine to you. She read to you. She helped with your lessons. She was kind and smart and funny. But now she is gone. Your father remarries quickly. Your new stepmother doesn't want you. You are a reminder of your father's first wife, the insane woman. You are treated as unwanted in your own home. You ask about your mother constantly. When will she come home? Can you visit her? Your questions are dismissed. You are told not to speak of her. It upsets your father. It is shameful to have an insane mother. You are told lies. Some children are told their mothers died. Others are told their mothers abandoned them. You might not learn for years or decades that your mother is locked in an asylum. By the time you find out, she might actually be dead or so institutionalized she doesn't recognize you. You grow up with the stigma of having an insane mother. It affects your marriage prospects, potential spouses' families. Worry that insanity runs in your family. You might carry shame about your mother your entire life. You might believe the lies you were told, that she really was insane, that her commitment was justified. Or you might eventually learn the truth, that your mother was sane, that she was committed for being inconvenient, that you were separated from her for no legitimate medical reason. This knowledge is devastating. You've lost years with your mother because of a system that allowed husbands to dispose of unwanted wives. The relationship you might have had with her is gone forever, stolen by wrongful commitment. According to research by historian Dr. Akihito Suzuki on families of asylum inmates, children of committed mothers often suffered profound trauma from the separation. They lost their mothers, were given inadequate or false explanations, and carried stigma throughout their lives. Many children never saw their mothers again, either because contact was forbidden or because by the time they were adults and could seek their mothers out, their mothers had died in confinement. The asylum system destroyed not just women's lives, but also their children's childhoods and their family bonds. Let's examine the specific case of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, known as Bedlam, one of the most infamous asylums in England. Bethlehem had been housing the insane since the Middle Ages, but by the Victorian era it had become both asylum and tourist attraction. You were committed to Bethlehem in 1870. You are a 32-year-old woman committed by your husband for moral insanity. You refused to have sex with him after discovering he'd given you gonorrhea from his mistress. Bethlehem is enormous, a massive institution housing over 400 patients. The building is imposing prison. Like you are brought through the entrance and immediately stripped of your identity. Your clothes, your belongings, your name, all are taken. You become a patient number. The wards are nightmarish. Bethlehem has a reputation, and it is earned. Women are chained to walls if they're considered violent. The noise is constant screaming, crying, the rattle of chains. The smell is overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, excrement, the chemical smell of whatever drugs they're using to sedate unmanageable patients. But the worst part of Bethlehem is the visitors. On certain days, members of the public can pay to tour Bethlehem, to observe the lunatics as entertainment. You are on display. Wealthy Londoners stroll through the wards, pointing at patients, laughing at bizarre behaviours, treating human suffering as a spectacle. You are forced to endure being stared at, mocked, treated as less than human, as a curious specimen of insanity. You try to hide when visitors come through. You crouch in corners. You turn your face to the wall, but attendants force you to sit where you can be seen. You are part of the attraction. The humiliation is crushing. You are an educated woman being displayed like an animal in a zoo, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The medical treatment at Bethlehem is primitive even by Victorian standards. Patients are bled regularly, leeches applied to remove bad blood. that supposedly causes madness. You are purged with powerful laxatives. You are subjected to ice baths. If you are particularly difficult, you are put in a rotating chair, a device that spins patients rapidly until they vomit and lose consciousness, supposedly calming mania. According to research by historian Dr. Jonathan Andrews on Bethlehem's history, the hospital represented the worst of Victorian asylum practice. The combination of genuine medical facility and public entertainment created particularly degrading conditions for inmates. Women committed to Bethlehem suffered not just confinement and poor treatment, but also public humiliation. The practice of allowing public viewing wasn't abolished until the 1770s officially, but informal viewing by interested parties continued well into the Victorian era. Let's examine the role of female doctors and reformers who tried to change the asylum system from within. You are Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Henderson, one of the first female physicians in England, qualified in 1865. You are deeply concerned about asylum conditions and the wrongful commitment of sane women. You begin investigating, visiting asylums, interviewing female inmates. What you discover appalls you. You find women who are clearly sane, committed for reasons that have nothing to do with mental illness. You find conditions that are medically unsound, treatments that harm rather than help, brutal restraints used unnecessarily, complete absence of therapeutic intervention. You try to speak out about what you found, but you are dismissed. Male doctors tell you that, as a woman, you are too emotional, too sympathetic to hysterical female patients. They suggest your concerns about wrongful commitment are projection. Perhaps you are worried you could be committed yourself, given your unwomanly pursuit of a medical career. Your professional opinion is devalued because of your sex. You try to work within the system. You push for reforms, better training for asylum staff, more rigorous commitment procedures, regular independent inspections. You face resistance at every turn. The asylum system is profitable and established. Doctors who make money from asylum work don't want oversight. Families who use asylums to dispose of inconvenient women don't want it to become more difficult. You manage some small victories. You help a few wrongfully committed women get released by providing expert medical testimony about their sanity. You influence some asylum operators to improve conditions, but the fundamental system remains unchanged. You die in 1917, having spent decades fighting asylum abuse, but never seeing the complete reform you fought for. Other female reformers faced similar struggles. Josephine Butler, primarily known for her work on prostitution laws, also campaigned against asylum abuse. She highlighted how prostitutes were sometimes committed to asylums as a form of imprisonment without trial. Florence Nightingale, though focused on nursing reform, also wrote about asylum conditions and the need for trained nursing staff in mental institutions. According to research by historian Dr. Claire Brock on Victorian female medical reformers, women doctors and activists faced enormous obstacles in trying to reform asylums. They were dismissed as hysterical or overly sympathetic. Their professional opinions were devalued. They had limited power within medical and legal systems dominated by men. Despite these obstacles, they persisted, creating incremental change and laying groundwork for later reforms. Let's examine the specific experience of Irish women committed to English asylums. Woman facing the double stigma of being Irish and female in Victorian England. You are a 28-year-old Irish immigrant woman living in London in 1885. You work as a domestic servant. You are Catholic in a Protestant household. Your employers find you increasingly troublesome. You insist on attending Mass. You refuse to work on holy days. You express political opinions about Irish independence. Your employers decide you are mentally unbalanced. Your Catholicism is seen as excessive religiosity. Your nationalism is seen as political mania. Your Irish identity itself is pathologized. Victorian racial theories suggests that Irish people are mentally inferior to English people, more prone to insanity and moral degeneracy. Being Irish is itself a risk factor for being diagnosed as insane. You are examined by a doctor who shares these prejudices. He notes your Irish accent, your Catholic beliefs, your political opinions. He diagnoses you with religious and political mania complicated by racial degeneracy. You are committed to an asylum. In the asylum, your Irishness marks you as particularly low status even among inmates. English inmates look down on you. Staff treat you with special contempt. The Irish are seen as drunk, violent, stupid. Every stereotype is applied to you. If you speak with your Irish accent, you are mocked. If you pray in Irish or Latin, you are punished for using foreign languages. You are denied contact with Catholic clergy. The asylum chaplain is Anglican. You are expected to attend Anglican services. Your requests to see a Catholic priest are denied. This would be accommodating your religious mania. Your faith, which is core to your identity, is treated as symptom of your insanity. You have no advocates outside the asylum. Your family are back in Ireland. They might not even know you've been committed. The Irish community in London doesn't know where you are. You've disappeared into the asylum system, one of hundreds of Irish immigrant women who vanished this way. According to research by historian Dr. Catherine Cox on Irish women in Victorian asylums, Irish women in England faced particular vulnerability to asylum commitment. They were subject to both ethnic and gender discrimination. Their poverty, their Catholicism, their political sympathies, their accents and cultural practices all could be pathologized as evidence of mental deficiency or insanity. Many Irish women were committed to English asylums and never released, dying far from home, buried in unmarked graves. Let's examine the specific legal battles that gradually created protections against wrongful commitment. In 1846, Louisa Nottage's case went to trial after her release. The trial exposed the ease of wrongful commitment. Louisa's lawyer, William Rappel, argued that British law gave families and doctors too much power to imprison sane people without trial or evidence. The trial revealed shocking details. Dr. Forbes Winslow, who had certified Louisa as insane, admitted under cross-examination that he'd spent only 30 minutes with her before making his diagnosis. He'd relied mainly on her brother's descriptions of her behaviour, rather than his own observations. He conceded that religious enthusiasm alone wasn't grounds for commitment, but couldn't explain what other symptoms he'd observed. The jury found in Louisa's favour, awarding her £500 in damages, a significant sum, though nothing could compensate for 4 years of wrongful imprisonment. More importantly, the trial created public scandal. Newspapers covered it extensively. The public was outraged to learn how easily sane people could be locked in asylums. The trial contributed to the Lunacy Act of 1853, which required that people committed to asylums must be examined by 2 independent doctors, rather than one doctor hired by the family. The examination had to occur within 1 week of commitment. Asylum operators had to keep detailed records of all patients. The commissioners in lunacy were given power to inspect asylums and investigate complaints. But the reforms were limited. Independent doctors could still be found who would cooperate with families wanting to commit someone. The 1 week examination requirement could be satisfied with minimal effort. Once committed, patients still had limited recourse for challenging their confinement. Further reforms came slowly. The Lunacy Act of 1890 added more protections. Commitment required certification by 2 medical practitioners. Patients gained the right to appeal to magistrates, and regulations governing asylum conditions were strengthened. But even these reforms didn't prevent all wrongful commitments. They just made them slightly more difficult and created some mechanisms for appeal. According to research by legal historian Dr. Peter Bartlett on Victorian lunacy law, the legal reforms of the 19th century represented gradual recognition that wrongful commitment was a real problem requiring legal safeguards. Each scandal, Louisa Nottage, Georgina Weldon, others created public pressure for reform, but the reforms were always incomplete, always compromises between protecting individual liberty and giving families and doctors authority to confine genuinely dangerous or incompetent people. The balance tilted too far toward authority. Well into the 20th century, let's examine the specific case of Friern Hospital, formerly Coney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, which was the largest asylum in Europe when it opened in 1851. You are committed to Coney Hatch in 1875. You are a 25-year-old working-class woman committed by your father because you are pregnant out of wedlock. This is moral insanity. Having sex before marriage is evidence of mental and moral defect. Coney Hatch is vast. It was designed for 1,000 patients, but eventually houses over 3,000. The scale is overwhelming. You are one of thousands. A number rather than a person. The corridors seem to stretch forever. You can walk for 10 minutes inside the building without seeing the outside. The institutional scale is dehumanizing. You feel like an ant in a massive machine designed to process lunatics. The overcrowding is severe. Wards designed for 30 patients house 60. Beds are crammed so close together you are touching the women on either side. There is no privacy, no personal space, no moment alone. You are always surrounded by other patients, by noise and chaos and suffering. The regime is rigid. Everything happens on schedule. Wake at 6 a.m, breakfast at 7 a.m, day room until noon, dinner at noon, day room until 6 p.m, supper at 6 p.m, bed at 8 p.m. Every day is identical. You follow the routine because you have no choice. Deviation results in punishment. You are expected to be docile, compliant, to fit into the institutional machine without resistance. Medical treatment is minimal. With 3,000 patients, doctors can't provide individual attention. You might see a doctor for 5 minutes once a month. Your treatment consists of routine discipline, work. You are assigned to the asylum laundry, where you wash institutional linen for hours every day, and drugs if you are disruptive. There is no therapy, no meaningful intervention, no effort to address whatever problems led to your commitment. You are just warehoused. You give birth in the asylum's lying-in ward. The baby is immediately taken from you and sent to a foundling hospital. You never hold your child, never know whether it is a boy or girl, never learn what happens to it. You are expected to recover quickly and return to the asylum routine. Your grief at losing your baby is interpreted as evidence of continuing instability. You spend 3 years at Coney Hatch. By the time you are released, you are institutionalized. You've adapted so completely to asylum life that you struggle to function outside. You've lost 3 years of your youth, your baby, and your ability to live independently. You are marked forever as someone who was in Coney Hatch, which everyone knows is the massive lunatic asylum. Employment is difficult to find. You end up in prostitution, the only work available to women with your stigma. According to research by Dr. David Berger on Coney Hatch's history, the asylum exemplified the Victorian approach of institutional warehousing of the mentally ill and the socially inconvenient. The massive scale made any genuine treatment impossible. Patients were managed, not treated. The asylum functioned as a warehouse for people society didn't want to deal with. The genuinely mentally ill, but also unmarried pregnant women, the elderly with no family, petty criminals, alcoholics, anyone whose behavior was socially unacceptable. Coney Hatch processed thousands of women through its wards, permanently damaging most of them. Let's examine one final reflection on the lasting impact of this history. The Victorian asylum system's treatment of intelligent women has echoes that persist today. Women who are too assertive are still labelled as aggressive or bitchy. Women who express anger are still seen as hysteric or unbalanced. Women's pain is still more likely to be dismissed as psychological rather than physical. Women's reports of sexual assault are still sometimes questioned as possible delusions or exaggerations. The specific mechanism commitment to asylums for being too intelligent is no longer common in developed nations. Legal protections exist that Victorian women didn't have, but the underlying attitude that women who don't conform to gender expectations must have something wrong with them persists in subtler forms. Women are still disproportionately diagnosed with certain mental health conditions. Borderline personality disorder is diagnosed far more often in women than men, and some critics argue it is a modern equivalent of hysteria, a label applied to women who are emotional, difficult, who've experienced trauma. Women are still prescribed psychiatric medications at higher rates than men. Women's emotions are still pathologized in ways that men's aren't. The fight that Elizabeth Packard, Georgina Weldon, and other Victorian women began continues. It continues in advocating for better mental health treatment that doesn't pathologize normal female emotions. It continues in challenging gender stereotypes that label assertive women as aggressive. It continues in believing women who report their experiences rather than assuming they're exaggerating or delusional. It continues in remembering what was done to previous generations of women and refusing to let history repeat. The women locked in Victorian asylums for being too intelligent, too educated, too independent. They were our great-great-grandmothers, our ancestors in the fight for women's equality. They suffered so that we wouldn't have to. They resisted even when resistance seemed hopeless. They refused to accept that their intelligence, their independence, their refusal to submit made them insane. We honor them by remembering their stories. We honor them by continuing their fight. We honor them by being the intelligent, independent, educated, opinionated women they were punished for being. We honor them by living the lives they were denied, lives of freedom, education, self-determination. We honor them by never taking for granted the rights and protections they died without having. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow grateful for legal protections against wrongful confinement, for the recognition that intelligence in women is not mental illness, for the slow progress toward gender equality that has been fought for over generations. The women of the Victorian era who were locked in asylums for being too smart, too independent, too unwilling to submit. Remember them. Their suffering bought the freedoms we take for granted. Their resistance, even when it failed, mattered. They refused to accept that intelligence in women was insanity, and eventually, finally, society started to agree with them. Good night.